I want to introduce now Alison Smale. She is the executive editor of the International Herald Tribune since 2008, and she came to the AHT from the New York Times, where she was deputy foreign editor since 2002. She started her career in a news agency at AP, and she has covered for AP the fall of the Soviet Empire. And she was in Moscow and in Vienna, where she covered all Eastern Europe. So Alison will present the first plenary of this conference, and it is a plenary where some extraordinary women are going to tell you inspiring tales from the front line. Alison?
So, good morning, everyone. That beginning was truly inspiring, a message from Aung San Suu Kyi, the usual very strong and clear speech from Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. She is so clear about how the law can serve us all, and pretty shocking example of how culture trumps law every single day. I'd also like naturally to draw your attention to something that the International Herald Tribune has done in this field. Just yesterday we had a poignant and ultimately, I think, hopeful story, although it was depressing, on page 1. It was the story of Gul Meena, a young Afghan woman whose head was split open by an axe, probably wielded by her brother, who apparently chased down his married sister after she had eloped from their home in remote eastern Afghanistan with a married man. Against all odds, Gul Meena survived that axe attack and is recovering thanks to the good offices of Women for Afghan Women, an Afghan-American group that has been doing remarkable work for the past 10 years. I single out the story because it's not only an example of how traditional culture trumps law, but it did actually also signal some shift in Afghanistan. Along the way to Gul Meena's survival, there were villagers, police, doctors, and officials who recoiled from the way that traditional Pashtun law had been applied in this case, and recoiled from the clash between that tribal law and the actual laws of Afghanistan, which shows that it does make a difference what laws you have on the books. And discussing and activating people, as Shireen described so eloquently, is what these 2 days are also all about. If people in Afghanistan can act with such courage, so can everyone. And who better to remind us of that than our first speaker? This is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the Somali-born former Dutch Member of Parliament who went to the Netherlands to escape forced marriage to a distant cousin and began her continuing struggle to work for the rights of Muslim women, especially in Europe, and for the enlightenment of Islam and the security of the West. I actually haven't seen her, but I'm so sorry. Please, the floor is yours. It's such an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great platform, and we thank you for providing us with that platform. I have decided to use my time today to draw attention to the institution of male guardianship over women in Muslim countries and in Muslim societies. The confinement of the Muslim woman to the care of a male guardian is a practice that affects roughly 700 million women in the world. This custom was founded on a seemingly good idea over 1400 years ago. In a desert tribal society, women needed protection from violence, exploitation, injustice, and neglect. However, today, this convention is the main source of crude power, abuse, discrimination, and abandonment. The victims are in the millions. If the position of the Muslim woman is to be improved at all, this terrible institution must be abolished where it exists and ferociously resisted where it's about to be fixed by the introduction of Sharia. The Muslim woman must become her own guardian. In some Muslim majority countries, the authority of the male guardian is formal and enforced by law. For example, in Saudi Arabia and in Iran. It is informal and practiced as a matter of culture in other countries like Turkey and Indonesia. And in others, it's a combination. If, for instance, a father or husband wants to assert his authority over his female ward, then in some cases he has the backing of the law, while in others, the law will not stop him from imposing his will on a rebellious ward. Now consider what the tyrant male guardian can do near impunity. He can't deny his ward food, shelter, and medicine. He can deny her education, and not only the right to work, but the ability to find a suitable job. He can deny her sexuality. He can deny her the right to divorce and the right of custody to her children. He can deny her the right to her own inheritance. A male guardian can choose any type of punishment he pleases to induce his ward to obey him without question. We just had the example of the axe. He can yell at her, he can beat her, he can lock her up, he can rape her, he can starve her, he can mutilate her, he can sell her to a stranger in marriage, he can subject her to the cutting and sewing of her genitals, he can even kill her in the name of honor. A tyrant male guardian can make the home life of his ward into a perpetual torture chamber, and many do. There are women who defend the institution of the male guardian. They argue from experience. They say that their guardians have been good to them and they're grateful. They say it's not the institution, but the men who abuse it who must be condemned. Other women argue from tradition. The custom is part of our identity. It's been around for so long, it must have some intrinsic value. A context where women have no formal male guardian is foreign, and it is thus unacceptable. Other women argue from religious conviction. They say it's God's will. If I do not do what my guardian tells me, or if I condemn the institution of guardianship, then I'll compromise my hereafter. Other women argue from convenience, because where there is no functioning government, or government itself is the biggest source of oppression, things are not different from the 7th century, where the whole idea of guardianship was inspired. They say that a bad guardian is better than none at all. But we know now that the costs of the institution to the life and welfare of women far outweigh the benefits to them. Male guardianship over women is not unique to Islamic culture and civilization. It was for centuries the universal approach to the regulation of the relationship between men and women in society. Societies like Britain that give women self-determination while modifying national laws to protect them are all the evidence we need to support the abolition of this abominable institution, where it's in place as a matter of law or as a matter of culture. No large-scale emancipation is achieved without struggle. Those in power have no incentive to share it or relinquish it. Technically, Muslim jurists disagree on the scope of the male authority over his female ward. But these disagreements are meaningless noises made in male-only chambers. Few, if any, of the participants actually bother to advocate or organize, let alone mobilize against abusive male guardians. The stakeholders of the status quo are a mixture of women with marvelous male guardians who don't see the point of change, or their governments who cannot be bothered, or clergymen who imagine themselves the mouthpieces of God, or extremists invested in life after death and determined to implement Sharia. They see female freedom as the main obstacle to their utopia. But there are also many members of Western businesses, media, governments, and even feminists who are eager to respect what to them is an inexplicable foreign culture. And of course, the male guardians who wantonly engage in the abuse of their female wards. But I see an opportunity. We live in a unique moment today, and I think Muslim women and those who support them can take advantage of that opportunity. First, there are more and more people within the Muslim world and within Muslim communities, men and women, who are standing up for their rights. There are large numbers of human rights organizations and activists. There is a unique opportunity today because there is a struggle for freedom inside Muslim countries. There is technology, there is the power of information, there is social media. I think of immigration as an opportunity for change because it brings us women in contact with free cultures where women are their own guardians. There are platforms like this one, the Trust Women's Conference, that give us voice and an opportunity to act. The future is not bleak, but we must take advantage of this opportunity for change. It is time that the Muslim woman becomes her own guardian. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the inspiring call to action. The next speaker is Kevin Bales, co-founder of Free the Slaves. He had been an academic sociologist, I'm told, for nearly 20 years when he learned that slavery still existed. As we've now heard from Monique, 22 to 27 million such people exist in the world today. His 1999 study, which was called Disposable People, New Slavery in the Global Economy, investigated slave-based businesses in 5 countries and led to the formation of his NGO. So I hand the floor over to you to tell us all about it. I believe you're going to examine how women are enslaved through child marriage. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. It's wonderful to be on this panel. I'm not one of the extraordinary women that Alison said would be on this panel. I have to say, an amazing film. I do despair of my brother men. I just despair sometimes. I try to raise my son to be the right sort, but boy, it's hard to reach out to the others. And sometimes I think in my despair, I think the only way that we might move forward is something that I remember Barbara Walters, the great television journalist, interviewing women in Afghanistan before the Soviet invasion, who were 3 wives of one man, and they were saying, you know, how much they want that equality. They're moving forward. They really want to. She went back after the Soviet invasion. She was interviewing them again. They had really dropped back. They were especially walking long distances behind their husband. And she said, why? Why are you doing this? I mean, you had stopped that. Why now are you walking 6, 8, 10 paces behind your husband as you walk through the hills? And they said, landmines. I sometimes think that I would never support military action just against men, but landmines. That's all. That's all I want to say about it. We are in an interesting moment of the cyclical nature of the history of our movements. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when we talked about contemporary forms of slavery, people said, what is that? I don't believe there is such a thing. All that ended in the 19th century. What on earth are you going on about? Now, today, we've reached that level of awareness that people do understand, and they are moving forward, and there is a growing movement that's in an exponential upward curve. And yet, we start again with questions of forced marriage. Around the world, as you talk to people, the definition question comes up constantly. Don't you mean arranged? Don't you mean assisted. What on earth are you saying? All marriage is slave? I mean, it's still a problem of just getting the concepts across. And I think there are a number of things that we have to do, and I want to touch on some of those and put a little bit of data behind our issue. But to also say, I'm still not completely resolved about how we best present concepts of forced marriage. I've made this little graphic just to say, if it's marriage in the sort that we all believe in, it's not forced. I think that does not equal sign has to be there. And I tend to think that and understand how, slavery has been hidden for thousands of years behind all sorts of social institutions, between all of the great social institutions about law and religion and commerce and things like race, and also behind marriage. And that in many ways, if we look at the situation of women and sometimes men in forced marriages, we realize that they meet all the criteria for international law of enslavement. I'm sometimes wondering if we shouldn't call these bride slaves, to be a little more precise and exact about what we're doing. This is just an idea. I'm not saying this is anything I'm locking myself to, but I'm trying to think through how best to portray this so that we don't constantly confuse ideas of marriage with ideas of enslavement and force in ways that demean one and somehow excuse the other. Now, one of the things that's important to understand about, and I'm going to keep saying forced marriage now that I've just said I won't, but one of the things that I think is important to understand about forced marriage is that, like slavery, about the different types of slavery, it comes in many, many forms. We know that across human history, you could point to probably hundreds of different mechanisms and processes of enslavement, and that you can look across forced marriage and see the same thing. So I had in my speaker's agreement the right to put in a couple of charts because I'm a licensed nerd, statistical academic. So I get two of these. So here's one of the first ones. Just to say, if you look, for example, at slavery, there are many, many types of slavery. I've put up 5 well-known types. One of those, I believe, is forced marriage. If you look then at forced marriage, there are 5, I've put in 5 well-known types of forced marriage. And then just to explain how I believe that those types proliferate, I point to the fact that there are religious bases for forced marriage, as was just explained very well, and that those also can diversify and expand. And that we're going to have to think through not just some simplistic idea of forced marriage, but understand this complexity and to work about how we address it in different ways, because it takes so many different forms. And I'm very keen to tell you that's an indicative chart, certainly not an exhaustive listing of the types of slavery or the types of forced marriage. Let me bring a couple of examples from our own work of our organization. Eastern Congo. This woman is named Juma. You'll remember that on the chart, one of the types of forced marriage said debt, settlement of debt. We found that in Eastern Congo, a large number of women that we've worked with there, our partners work with there, are actually in forced marriages, are enslaved into marriages because their fathers have simply run up a debt. Her father, she said very frankly, was a drunk. He drank way too much. He built up an enormous bill at a local tavern. And when it came time to settle, he had no money. So he traded his daughter for the bill that he owed for the drinks he had had. It's a pretty shocking thing to think about a bar tab being the way of enslavement for a young woman. She said to us, the man said, "You're my wife. I've just given money to your father." And then he started touching me. And she went through a long process of trying to back away, step forward, to speak to her other relatives, to stay with other relatives, and yet everything was pushing her within her cultural context into that situation. Her situation is one of the things that I think clearly illustrates what we face when we talk about these situations of forced marriage. Because we're going to come to a moment, in a moment I want to show you a larger picture of something that Alison mentioned in particular, which is about these legal systems which are running parallel to each other and which in fact then create a context in which a young woman like this is not just against her alcoholic father or against her other relatives. She's actually struggling against an entire community which is saying to her, you must obey our laws, you must obey our customs, and even a wider community to that, an entire tribal community and so forth. So that it's not one woman against an abusive father, it's one woman against her entire community and culture. And that's a very hard job indeed. Of course, in Eastern Congo, Susanna had one of those horrific experiences, which is again a type of forced marriage. She's in Baraka, she's 14 years old. The troops, the rebel troops come out of the forest, take her village, rape her, capture her and her sisters, kill a number of members of her family, take her into the forest with them, and she becomes just a sexual object for the use of a number of these soldiers. In time, one of the officers decides that to keep her as a wife and simply says to the other soldiers, this is my wife now. I've decided to keep this one. And so she becomes his wife, his bush wife. The parallel systems that even mean well in her situation are a little surprising, because after about 9 months in that situation, the United Nations began a process of disarming and repatriating these Rwandan rebel soldiers. So as they move toward the Rwandan border, she's taken along with the armed group, and she's not permitted to speak to the United Nations officials herself. They're simply informed, this is my wife, I'm a Rwandan officer in this rebel force, she's coming with me. So though she's a Congolese who wants to go home, she's repatriated to Rwanda and ends up there for 2 years as still in the forced marriage of a Rwandan soldier. All because the United Nations, who really should have known better, didn't speak to her separately. I mean, it would have been about that much that could have made the difference to allow her to go home to her family as opposed to being repatriated to a foreign country. When she finally escaped and returned to her community, as you can see, she said, it's terrible, my community just doesn't accept me. Now, how does all this fit into a larger picture? First, just let me show you a map here of slavery in the world today. It's the pink and red colors that show the highest proportions of a national population to be enslaved. So this is not in terms of the total numbers, but the proportion of the nation's population which is in slavery. And you can see the usual suspects of where we know there's a lot of slavery in the countries that are pink and red. But let's overlay on that data from UNESCO showing child marriage. And we see that the same patterns are fairly in place, and it's not a big surprise that we would have forms of enslavement through marriage that would match into general enslavement. But now let's take one more bit of data, because again, this is part of my nerdy license to do. And I reached out just recently and found a place where we could look at all areas where there were dual legal systems. And we discovered that the overlay of the highest levels of enslavement, the highest levels of forced marriage, and the presence of dual legal systems are right on top of each other. I appreciate that Ireland is there, as is the island of Guernsey in the Channel Islands and several others. There are places where customary laws have been adopted into national legal systems, like Ireland. In Ireland, it applies primarily to land tenure and not to family law. But I wasn't going to exclude any place that actually had dual legal systems just because they didn't happen to also be right. But as you can see, it's those areas where tribal law, customary law are operating in parallel to national law that are creating those contexts in which, while the national law makes it very clear that forced marriage is illegal, you come down to the local level, the national law does not reach there. And again, the community, like that of Juma, says, no, this is what we get. This is what you get. There are hopeful parts. Here we are back in Eastern Congo. Here is the chap in the jacket is in fact the local chief of one of the tribal organizations around Bukavu. He said he has come to understand, in league with one of our partner organizations there, a women's organization, that he's come to see forced marriage as a curse, that he sees it as a curse on his community, a curse on his village. He says the great problem, though, is that everyone was seeing it as normal. He condemns it. He thinks women and men are now equal. He's gone through quite a phenomenal transformation. But it was interesting the way he said it as well. He says it's like a song that gets in your head and it won't go away, this forced marriage thing, that it's so deeply in the culture that people just keep holding on to it. And he said later, I have to find a way to teach a new song. I have to find a new song to teach because this one is so deeply ingrained in the minds of our village and of our community. This is the organization that we work with there, SOS Femmes en Danger, and he was saying, people are beginning to change. There's organizations like this, but this is going to be a very long and very tough struggle as we go forward. I've got a few concepts I want to throw out, a few first steps. I'm not going to go into them at length, but I think we've got to agree what it is we're looking at, that this is in fact, because it meets all the criteria of the legal definitions, a type of slavery. We just need to say so. We need to engage with those communities and help them to tell us what we need to do to work with them and move forward away from this. We've got to find out how many people, how many women are and young men are in this situation and ways to identify it. In the past, we've worked hard to build up estimates of the number of people in slavery and the number of people in human trafficking, but in spite of the fact that numbers fly around on the issue of forced marriage, I don't have confidence in them yet. I just don't have confidence. I really think we need to do some measurement to figure out how much and where, and then begin to build a response, and then begin to find ways to resolve those parallel laws and enforce the laws that are actually on the books. I think that's a very simple set of action points, but I think they sort of just arise immediately out of our current early stages of this moment in this movement. Juma doesn't want this for her daughter, right? And obviously we don't either. And I think, and what I'm very happy about is that often when I speak about this to more general audiences, people want to debate and say, is this religion? Is this just about culture? Do we have the right to discuss this if it's not our culture? Well, I'm tired of that debate. This is about slavery. This is about the abuse of women. And I'm ready to stop the debate and start the action. And this next slide has almost nothing to do with my talk, but it was taken at the same time we were there in Eastern Congo, and these kids were so cute, particularly this kid on the far right, that I just can't not have it, right? I'm sorry. I just have to put it in because we're talking about tough, sad stuff sometimes, and it helps to look at the kids who are at the feminist organization, the children of the women who are the new women who are leading that community. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and now we know the answer, landmines. The next presentation is a story told by two women, Mercy Chidi, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, from Kenya, and Fiona Sampson from Canada. Mercy has 17 years of experience in working with humanitarian organizations to devise, administer, and evaluate programs in several fields of development. Fiona is a Canadian lawyer. She has worked to help women, natives, the disabled, and the two of them have united in working on the 160 Girls project. This refers to 160 Kenyan girls, women, who are suing the government for failing to protect them from rape. Fiona Sampson's group, Equality Effect, is providing financial and legal support, and I will let the two of them take it from there. Please come up to the stage.
Thank you, Harrison. I'm completely humbled and very privileged to be standing before you today. I don't have notes to present, but I'm going to be sharing from the heart and sharing our story. A few years ago, in course of my work, I work with children infected by HIV and AIDS in my hometown, which is in Meru, Kenya. I came across girls who would come to us, very young girls between the age of 3 years to 17 years, who would come to us and tell us that I don't want to be sharing the bed with my father, or I don't want to be sharing the bed with my uncle. And the more we probed further, we found that it was actually much deeper than just sharing a bed. The girls were actually being sexually abused. And many of these girls had lost either one of their parents to HIV/AIDS, and some of them were actually child-headed household who are looking upon their uncles for care and support as they take care of the other siblings behind them. And I may not be able to mention all the stories, but we kept getting a lot of these stories. Unfortunately, in course of our work, we didn't have a shelter where we would temporarily rescue these girls. And I remember one special case whereby a girl who came to us for refuge were not able to do much because we didn't have a shelter. And she ended up moving to Nairobi, which is a capital city. And the only way she could survive was to cohabit with a man. And she ended up getting pregnant at a very early age of 12 years old. Got pregnant, developed complication. And in the course of my work visiting the slums, the girl came running to me and said, "You don't remember me?" I said, "No, I don't remember you." And she said, "But I came to you when I was running away from this and this, and I was devastated, feeling this girl came to me. There was nothing I did to her, and she ended up in the worst situation." And that is how Tumaini Girls Rescue Home, Tumaini, which is a Swahili word for Hope Center, was started basically as a safe haven for girls who are facing different forms of abuse, from sexual abuse to forced child marriage to crisis pregnancy, etc., etc., to female genital mutilation. And we've been rescuing girls. The youngest has been 3 years old, being raped. In Kenya, we use the term defilement, who are being defiled, but very close people who they actually trust. And coming from a culture whereby sexuality is a taboo, when growing up, I remember the only thing my parents told me when I grew up as a girl is, "Don't play with boys, you're going to get pregnant." That's the only sexual education I received from my parents. Why? Because we live in a culture where sexuality is a taboo, so you don't open up to speak issues of sexuality with your children. So when girls as young as 3-year-olds are being raped, they don't know how to open up to maybe their parents and tell them what they're going through. 2, we have a very good culture, but again, it can be misused, whereby if I am the firstborn in the family, automatically I'm named after my mother's mother. And then automatically I become my grandfather's wife. So my grandfather will refer to me as my wife. It's a good culture, but unfortunately, sometimes as parents, the children have been brought up to believe that this is my husband. So even when the grandfather comes home, the mother says, "Your husband is here," because of the culture that we have. So when the grandfather begins to sexually abuse the girl is unable to tell the mother, because my mother believes this is my husband. So she has to do all what pertains to the wife, to the grandfather. So we've had cases of girls who have been sexually abused by the grandfathers, girls who have been abused by the uncles who are supposed to be protecting them, girls who have been abused by relatives. And mainly, as I mentioned before, my work involves taking care of children infected and affected by HIV and AIDS. And we come from a culture where some of the men have a taboo and they believe having sex with a virgin girl to cure them of HIV and AIDS. So this has exposed many very young girls, as young as 3 years, as young as 4 years, to men who believe that if they have sex with a virgin girl, it's going to cure them of HIV and AIDS. It's been quite devastating. And we opened up our doors to the Hope Center about 6 years ago. And initially, we rescued very little girls, but in terms of the community awareness that we have created in the community, we have rescued more than 270 girls, mainly survivors of sexual violence. Many of them have had children with their grandparents out of the rape Some of them have had the children with their own fathers as out of rape, because when it happens, they don't know how to tell. And most times the teachers in school will discover when the girl is pregnant. And in a country where abortion is not permitted, so the girls end up carrying the pregnancy to term. We have girls as young as 11 years old, 12 years old. We have a 12 years old who has a child with a father. And it becomes very traumatizing because she doesn't know if this child is going to call the father father or is going to call the child, the father, grandfather. So they are kind of so confused and traumatized. And it's been very devastating working with these girls. Coming across whereby we began looking at how do we address this problem of child sexual violence. I come from a country whereby Kenya is a member state to most of the international laws. That is a Convention on the Right of UN Convention of the Right of the Child. We have the African Charter of the Right of the Child. We have the Sexual Offences Act in Kenya. We also have the Children's Act. Unfortunately, our government has done very little in terms of enforcing the laws that protect women and children. They are very good laws. They exist in the books, but unfortunately, they are not being enforced. And because the laws are not being enforced, this has exposed. I'm talking mainly about children. This is girls, because I mainly work with young girls below the 17 years old who have faced different forms of abuse. And because our government has not been enforcing the laws that protect especially women and children, this has exposed many girls, and they have become very vulnerable to the male who thinks there's nothing that can be done about it. It got very frustrating a few years ago, and we began seeing how do we ensure these girls can access justice. And we'll ensure once the cases are reported to us, we go to the police station and have them record their statement. Unfortunately, I remember when I went to the police station one time with a girl who was about 6 years old, and the police had the story, it became a juicy story, and began telling the colleague, oh, we know, come and listen to this story. And the child has to tell the story all over again. Another colleague comes in and said, come and listen to this story. So it becomes very traumatizing. And we found out by the time you're going to court, the child is actually locked up. They can't even tell it anymore because they're already traumatized. And then the police officers hardly do very little in terms of investigating the sexual offenses. Mainly they are compromised by the perpetrators, maybe being given very little money, or sometimes the family of the perpetrator actually try and compromise the family of the child survivor, maybe offering some little money. But mainly the police have been doing very shoddy jobs in terms of investigating. Hardly do they visit the scene of crime where it happened. Hardly do they take their statements from the children. Hardly are the exhibits presented in court when it happens. And basically, sometimes if a girl has conceived out of it, they'll tell us we have to wait until the child delivers so we can do a DNA to confirm actually if this person is the one who sexually abused the child. So you are like, if the child never got pregnant, it means that you're not going to prosecute the offender because there was no pregnancy. So it became very frustrating, to a point where, as an organization, out of maybe the 10 cases we'll have in court, maybe of one case will be convicted, the offender will be convicted. And it was draining emotionally for us, working with these children, where, yes, the offense happened. Yes, there's medical evidence that this happened. Yes, we have the exhibits to say that this happened, but the police always have an argument. We don't have fuel in our vehicle. We don't have personnel to go and pursue it. And it got very frustrating. And I remember a couple of years ago, I am not a lawyer. I began getting a lot of interest. How can we support the girls? And I went for a training on women human rights in Toronto. And I came across my colleague and friend, Fiona Sampson, who is a human rights lawyer, and shared with her the challenges that we are having in terms of young girls accessing justice. When we started this project about 2 years ago, we only had about 160 girls, and that's why we call the project 160 Girls Project. But between then and now, we have rescued more than 270 girls, all mainly cases of sexual violence. And I said our youngest survivor has been a 3-year-old, whereas the oldest we have rescued have been a 16 years old. And their stories are very devastating. Some of them have gone through trauma, which we cannot imagine. And we've been working on a project where we're trying to hold the state accountable for failing to protect the girls and seeing how they can enforce the laws that exist that protect women and children, because we have very good laws, but not unless those laws are enforced, then there is nothing much we are doing. And I'd like to stop at this juncture and maybe ask my colleague, Fiona Sampson, and maybe share a little bit more in terms of the legal action that we're taking in terms of ensuring girls can access justice.
So, asante sana, karibu, habari, and Mercy, I hope will confirm for me that this is thank you, welcome, greetings in Swahili. I've been trying to improve my Swahili since I started working on the ground with Mercy and our other colleagues and friends in Kenya, but having somewhat limited success. I have been known to mangle a relatively straightforward phrase such as, hello, I'm in hotel room 19, into hello, I have 19 vaginas. So I'm fairly confident that what I've said is quite benign. But thank you for this opportunity to share with you the story of the 160 girls. I wanted to start by telling you Millie's story. Millie's story is the story of the girl who originally inspired the adoption of the case, and was the story that Mercy brought to us at the Equality Effect. And then talk a little bit about the specifics of the legal action that we have recently filed against the state of Kenya. So I should warn you that these stories sometimes sound like stories of violence and oppression, and they are stories of violence and oppression. But ultimately, the story of 160 girls is a story of empowerment and transformation. So if you stick with me, I'll get you through the violence and oppression, and I'll get you to the transformation and empowerment. So Millie is a little girl. She's one of the 160 girls who received care at the Tumaini Center in Meru, Kenya. She was about 12 or 13, I think, when this story took place a couple of years ago. She's from a rural community, which is covers most of the territory that the Tumaini Center provides for, and she had been defiled. Defiled is the term, as Mercy mentioned, that is used in the Kenyan Sexual Offences Act to describe the rape of young girls. And it's actually part of the problem. The term defilement is an old British term. It refers to the defilement of property. And so the fact that girls are understood to constitute property under Kenyan law is actually part of the problem here. But Millie is not her real name. We don't use the girls' real names to protect their identities. But Millie had been defiled and had conceived a baby out of the defilement. And Mercy was back in Millie's community visiting with her, and they attended a community meeting at a local village hall. And it was addressing routine issues relating to the community. And at the end of the meeting, things were wrapping up, and the chief of the village asked if anybody had anything to add. And Mercy didn't know this was coming, but Millie put up her hand, and this is representative, I think, of the incredible strength and courage and fortitude that defines the girls that inspired this project. Millie put up her hand, and in front of the entire community, jam-packed into this small meeting space, after the chief granted her permission to speak, she stood and she said, "I have this baby." And she said, "I don't want this baby." And she said, "I have this baby and I cannot go to school, and I have this baby and I'm not safe or free to walk the streets because that man over there," and she pointed at a man standing at the side of the room, she said, "he defiled me and he is free and I am not. And I want to know what you're going to do about it." And as Mercy told us at the Equality Effect, there was no answer for Millie. And there was this collective gasp in the room, in the hall, and some people started to cry, but no one could answer Millie. And there are very good laws in Kenya which, if they were effective, should be protecting girls from rape and defilement. But the problem is they're not enforced. So Mercy came to the Equality Effect with this conundrum, which she has described and others that we work with in Kenya describe as feeling like they are mopping the floor, that rescuing these girls, they're mopping the floor, and what really they want to see happen is to turn off the tap to make the rape stop. So the Equality Effect is an international NGO which uses human rights law in very concrete and applied ways to transform women's lives and improve the lives of women and girls. So what we're looking at in the 160 Girls claim is to get to the root source of the problem. The root source of the problem in this case is sex and age discrimination. The police refuse to enforce the existing laws really because of their discrimination against these girls and their failure to take the matter seriously. So we at the Equality Effect put together a legal advocacy initiative, and I want to tell you a little bit about what that initiative looks like. Critical to this work is the combination of three players. We have the frontline workers, the social workers that are part of Mercy's team. We have the lawyers who are an international team of pro bono lawyers from around the world that work collaboratively to bring justice to the girls. And we have our funders. And I think one of our funders, Marcia Cardamar from the People Sense Foundation, I think Marcia is here. I hope she's here. Maybe she's missing in action. But, oh, there she is. There's Marcia. And without people like Marcia and the People Sense Foundation, not just funders, but Marcia has actually committed herself to working with us to build the organization and to build this initiative. None of this work would be possible. So I do want to recognize that it is entirely unique and groundbreaking work, and none of it would happen without this unique and very resource-intensive backing that we have. So these three groups came together, and we developed this legal advocacy initiative, which is basically to hold the state of Kenya accountable for its failure to protect girls from rape. So we brought the lawyers together, and we looked at all the different options available to us to hold the police accountable. And by holding the police accountable, the goal is really to hold the perpetrators accountable and to shift the stigma from the girls to the perpetrators. So we looked at the idea of bringing a civil claim, bringing criminal claims, bringing a constitutional claim, developing some kind of hybrid of those options. And ultimately, after a year of research and analysis and very intensive discussion, we decided that we would bring a constitutional claim using the new Constitution of Kenya, which was introduced in 2010. So we decided that we would argue that under the equality provisions of the new Kenyan Constitution, the police failure to protect the girls from rape and the police failure to enforce these laws constitutes sex and age discrimination. So this is a completely novel approach to the problem. In 2 minutes, that's never good news. So we decided that we would focus on the equality provisions in the Kenyan Constitution. We're also claiming that it's a violation of the girls' right to security of the person, the right to dignity, access to justice, and their children's rights. But the legal component of the case is just one aspect of the action. Critical to any legal action is the evidence. So it has taken us 2 years to put together the evidence that we have put before the court. The evidence is the centerpiece of any legal action, and in this case, the real superheroes in this story are the Mercy and the social workers who are on the front line, risking their lives. They receive death threats and rape threats on a regular basis. And they're out there collecting what up until this point has only been anecdotal evidence. We've now documented 2 years of defilement and police refusal to address this defilement. So on October 11th, the International Day of the Girl Child, we made legal history in Kenya and in Africa. And we took this case to the High Court of Kenya in Meru. And we told the High Court that this is wrong, and that the girls' rights must be respected, and that the police need to enforce these existing laws. So that was legal history that we made on October 11th. Now we need to follow through on what we started, and we'll be making submissions to the court in the months ahead. We look forward to celebrating the next victory in this case, which is a declaration that the police must indeed enforce the existing laws that are intended to protect the girls' rights. And I would invite you, if you're interested, to go to the Equality Effect's website, www.theequalityeffect.org, and subscribe to our newsletter, and I'd be happy to keep you informed of our progress. And I'd like to thank you again, Asante Sana, for your attention, and thank you very much for your interest in the 160 Girls Project.
Thank you very much, Mercy and Fiona. An inspiring, really, call to action. I have a call to action of our own to announce. Follow us on Twitter at TrustWomenConf. You can use the hashtag TWConf12 for comments and questions, and we'd love to see them. And don't also forget that there'll be some live blogging at trustwomenconf.com/live, so that you can see the latest best stories and videos. I'm coming to the last speaker in this, what I think has been a really fabulous first session. It's going to take us to Pakistan and to the very important work of Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, who I'm very proud to say got her start at the New York Times Company. As I'm sure everyone in the room knows, she won an Oscar this year for her short documentary film Saving Face. Everyone probably remembers the harrowing sight of Rukhsana, a woman who had been doused with acid. But let's not forget that Sharmeen also found Pakistani women who had defied and fought their families and tradition to get an education and start overcoming gender discrimination. Sharmeen, the floor is yours. Wherever you are.
Thank you. I have the right to vote, the right to divorce, the right to get an education, the right to work, the right to inherit property in Pakistan, only because I was fortunate enough to be born into a family that allowed me those rights. While the Constitution enshrines these laws, in Pakistan, your family and community play a very big role in who you are. I've been making documentary films for over a decade now. But over the last 2 years, I focused specifically on women who are using culture to fight culture in Pakistan. And so today I might be one of the few who will bring you some good news. In 2010, I started working on Saving Face, a documentary film about women who have acid thrown on their faces for merely sometimes asking for a divorce or for disobeying a husband, or for spurning a potential suitor. And the family plays a big role in what happens to those women and what happens to the decisions they make once acid is thrown on their faces. I'm going to show you a little clip for Rukhsana and then discuss her case with you.
Next, please. Rukhsana? Oh, बेटा, it comes here. क्या हुआ था आपको?
तेजाब डाला।
किसने तेजाब डाला?
हाँ, तेजाब डाला। नंद ने पेट्रोल डाल दिया।
आपके शौहर ने आप पे तेजाब फेंका?
नंद ने पेट्रोल डाला था। फिर मेरी सास ने तीली लगाई, माचिस के साथ आग लगा।
तो तुम कहाँ रहती हो?
मुझे वो ले गए हैं अपने घर।
तुम अभी उसी घर में रहती हो?
हाँ। फिर मेरे बच्चे बीमार बहुत हो गए, बहुत बीमार हो गए। मैं फिर खर्चा उनको नहीं बर्दाश्त कर सकती थी। मेरे बाप गरीब है, इसलिए मैंने सुलह कर लिया।
Okay.
The law is on Rukhsana's side. Acid violence is punishable with sentences ranging from 14 years to life imprisonment and up to $11,000. She chose not to send her husband to jail, not only because she was poor, but also because no other woman in her village had ever taken her in-laws and sent them to jail. There was no precedent, and she was cajoled by her own parents not to take legal action. In the same film, I profile Zakia, a woman who had acid thrown on her face because she chose to ask for a divorce from her husband, who was an alcoholic and who beat her. Zakia's son and daughter supported her. She fought a long battle in court, but now her husband is serving 2 life sentences in jail. And I show you both these examples to show you how important it is for the family to support women in my part of the world. Because while laws exist and laws can protect women, if the family chooses not to allow their daughters to do that, there is no way for these women to use the law to benefit them. Earlier this year, I started researching honor killings in Pakistan. Over 1,000 women were killed in honor killings in the last 12 months. We believe the number is even higher, but many go undocumented. Unfortunately, the law on this is not on the side of women, because in 1990, Pakistan passed laws that make murder not a crime against the state, but a crime against the legal heirs of the victim. So many of these women are being killed by their own family members and thus cannot have anybody else file cases on their behalf after they pass away. But I found an incredible 23-year-old woman, Khalda Brohi, who has decided to change all of that, and she's doing it rather cleverly. When she was 16 years old, her cousin was killed in an honor killing in Balochistan, which is where she's from. The women in her village were not allowed an education, were not allowed to work. At the age of 12, 13, 14, they were married off. Her father decided he didn't want that life for Khalda and took her to Karachi, which is where she was educated. When she was 19 years old, Khalda started looking at why honor crimes are so prevalent in her province of Balochistan, and she found that because women had no way to economically empower themselves, they had no voice. So she formed Sugar, an organization that goes into these villages, convinces the men that they should allow her to set up vocational centers for women, and she tells the men that she is teaching the women how to embroider and bring back the lost heritage for generations of different patterns. But what she really does is talk to the women about their rights, tells them what happens to women in cities. She reads the Constitution to them. She tells them about the right to divorce, the right to have a voice, the right to an education, and for making a better tomorrow for their daughters. And she does this behind closed doors. Such an important step and such an important job for a 23-year-old. But it's not an easy calling for her. The next clip that I'm going to show to you is Khalda confronting the men in the village, so you can see the mindset that she's up against.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, कहिड़ा हाल आहिनि? ठीकु आहियो सभई? असां हिकिड़ी अहिड़ी तंज़ीम मां आहियूं जिथे असां ईअं ॾिसंदा आहियूं त सिर्फ़ु औरत न, उनजे सॼे घर वारनि खे फ़ाइदो थिए। बि अहिड़ो को इंतज़ाम कयूं जंहिंमें हुननि जी मार्केट माना का शइ ठाहिनि था, मार्केट में कीअं विकिणिजे हुनमें।
हाणे हिकिड़ो माण्हू जहिड़ो गुज़र करे हिते तव्हां हुनखे भर्त ॾियो।
बस कुछ ॾींहंनि जी, 2 ॾींहंनि जी, 2 ॾींहंनि जी।
छोकिरी आॻे जी स्कूल ते, ठीकु आहे, जंहिंसां ख़राब थी ते वई न त भॼी, पोइ वापसि आहे त उनजी गोली ख़र्चा। उनजो कहिड़ो इलाजु आहे? तव्हां चई त हुन सभिनि जे जवाब में तव्हांजी सिर्फ़ु हिकिड़ी गोली हूंदी, छा मतिलबु आहे? नजात जे कमु थियो त पोइ उनजी गोली आहे, नजात।
इनमें बेइज्जती छा है बेचारी छोकरी जो तो कसूर कोन
इहा ॻाल्हि तो न कई वई असां जेकॾहिं इहा ॻाल्हि थींदी आहे त उन कारतूस गोली हिकिड़ी ख़र्चींदी आहे
Khalda is leading a silent movement in Pakistan, and her work speaks volumes. I've come across a woman called Fatma who's rescuing children and men from bonded labor in brick kilns in the province of Punjab. Fatma was shot. Her brother was paralyzed from waist down because they decided to take on some very powerful owners. The law is on Fatma's side. Bonded labor is prohibited. You can be sent to jail for lengthy sentences. But the culture, the feudal culture that exists in Pakistan, means that people who work the land or people who work for brick kiln workers can be sold off because of the debt they hold. I came across a man called Ashik who had 8 children. Ashik was sold because he had taken money from his employer for medical attention for his daughter. And because that money he was unable to pay it back, he found that he'd been shipped off in the middle of the night in a truck to another brick kiln. And he had no idea what part of the country he was in. All of his children were working, some as young as 3, for the owner to pay back the debt. What Fatma does is very clever. She goes into the brick kilns, she confronts the brick kiln owners so that they know that she is out there, and then she holds a lot of different, I would say, rallies. She goes into a community where she has all of these people who are bonded laborers, and she reads them their rights on a loudspeaker right in front of the owner sometimes, and lets them know that the law is on their side. I'm going to show you a clip of her confronting one such man.
आप इधर क्या आपकी है हैसियत पोजीशन मालिक है क्या है मुंशी आप मुंशी यहाँ पर एक मजदूर को आपने मारा यहाँ कमरे में लिटा के मारा कुछ छितर बना हुआ यहाँ पड़ा हुआ है काम को डिस्टर्ब कर रही हैं नहीं मैं नहीं डिस्टर्ब कर रही मैंने तो उनको वो आ गए तो आप कह दें ये कारोबार मत करो हमें कह दें नहीं आप करें लेकिन ऐसा कारोबार नहीं करें जिसमें आप लोगों को मारपीट करें चलो भी चल तो कोई काम नहीं गए थे निकलो हम यहाँ पे कोई बंदे साढ़े लागे ना लगे अगर आपने बंद नहीं किया मेरी बात सुने नहीं आप गलत काम नहीं कर रहे आप जैसे पढ़े लिखे लोग ये इस तरह की बात करें अच्छा इस तरह आराम से बात करें हमने आपके साथ अच्छा चुप कर जाइए सर मैं नहीं चुप कर वो सुन ले वो भी बात सुन मैं आपकी बात को मैं इस बात से इनकार नहीं कर रहा
Fatma has the law on her side. Her challenge is to bridge the gap between how the labor law is perceived and how it is practiced. In the province of Balochistan, a few weeks ago, I met a young woman called Humaira. In her community and in her province, the literacy rate is 27% for young girls. In entire villages, not a single woman is educated. And Humaira has taken it upon herself to build schools and to empower these young girls to go to school. She goes door to door every single day, cajoling parents to send their children to school. And she has really revolutionized the village that she works in because she now has over 270 girls enrolled in school, where almost 5 years ago, virtually, there were none. Humaira is also taking the children that study in her school with her on this movement. So now not only does she go knocking door to door in her community to talk about the rights of women, she takes these children with her who then advocate on behalf of education. Let's watch a clip with Humaira, you will understand how difficult it was for her to get an education and for her family to support her own education. हुमैरा जानती हैं कि उनकी कम्युनिटी में औरत के लिए तालीम हासिल करना कितना मुश्किल है। अपनी पढ़ाई के लिए भी उन्होंने घर वालों की सख्त मजम्मत का सामना किया।
जैसे मैं गलियों में आता था तो लोग तरह तरह की बातें करते थे कि शर्म नहीं है और ये बहनों को जो है कुछ बोलते नहीं है। तो बहुत से बातों को सुन के आके फिर मैं अम्मी से लड़ पड़ता था कि नहीं भाई मेरी बहनें जो है नहीं पढ़ेंगे।
नहीं, लेकिन वो वक्त भी याद है, कुछ लोगों ने क्या बोला था कि ये बिल्कुल बैड कैरेक्टर है, इनको इन इलाके से निकाल दो। वो वक्त भी हमें याद है, आज दिन तक मकसूद मेरे दिल में इतना वो मुझे याद आता है तो मेरा दिल फटने लगता है कि मकसूद मेरी बहनों को इतना इन लोगों ने बुरा समझा कि तालीम इतनी बुरी चीज़ है।
So sometimes even when your family is supportive, the community is not supportive. And that is what Humaira is doing, changing the mindsets of the community, knowing fully well that she herself had to change the mindset of her own family first when she wanted to get an education. In my line of work, what makes me hopeful today is that there is a silent revolution taking place in Pakistan with women who are speaking out, with women who are challenging the status quo, with women who are using the law to empower themselves. And while some of the statistics are horrifying, it's these women that give me hope that for my own daughter, there is a better tomorrow coming. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. A good, hopeful note on which to end of a very wide-ranging and inspiring first session. We have a half an hour break to talk to each other, meet more people, and come back here where my friend Mabel Fonarangi will take up the discussion of when culture clashes with law. Thank you very much.